Okay.
Okay. Welcome,
Great.
everyone. And thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Deborah Penrose. I'm Vice Mayor and City Council member of Half Moon Bay. I'm also a member of the Library Governing Board for San Mateo County Libraries. I'm very excited to join you today with Christina Conklin to discuss her book, The Atlas of Disappearing Places, Our Coasts and Oceans in the Climate Crisis. I would also like to remind everyone to join us next Wednesday, April 27th at 6 p.m. for a conversation between Emily St. John Mandel, author of Sea of Tranquility and Station 11, and Annalee Newitz, The Future of Another Timeline and Four Lost Cities. Your microphone and video will be turned off, but please feel free to use the chat. You'll see the chat button at the bottom of your screen, and submit your questions in the Zoom Q&A. There's a button for that as well. For those who'd like to access live closed captions for this event, click on CC, then Show Subtitle. San Mateo County Libraries welcomes Christina Conklin, writer, artist, and researcher. Christina's work investigates the intersection of natural systems and belief systems, often using the ocean as both site and metaphor. Her essays, exhibitions, and installations consider our cultural responses to the ecological and social crises of our time. Christina's award-winning work has been exhibited in the US, Japan, and Hong Kong, and she is the co-author and illustrator of The Atlas of Disappearing Places. I'm so glad to be here with you tonight, Christina.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Christina holds an MFA from the California College of the Arts and has exhibited her work internationally. She is currently working with activists around the world to help communities create regenerative cultural systems. She lives here in Half Moon Bay with her husband and 2 children. Through a rich combination of place-based storytelling, clear explanations of climate science and policy, and beautifully rendered maps that use a unique ink-on-dried seaweed technique, the Atlas of Disappearing Places depicts 20 locations across the globe. Christina uses the ocean as a body that is suffering from chronic and acute inflammation and trauma as a metaphor to explain the pain that our world is in. She speaks of ocean dead zones, algae bloom, and the Pacific garbage patch, among other things. Christina Conklin, welcome. Can you tell us, what do you see as the most hopeful developments in recent years in public policy and awareness?
Thank you. There's been a big shift in the 4 years that I was writing and researching the book. I noticed that climate change went from sort of kind of a blip on the media radar to being really central, and that people have really awakened to the real intensity and need for change. And some of this has shown up in policy. You know, I like many am heartbroken that the climate change legislation in the Build Back Better plan has stalled. I mean, it was incredibly important. And, you know, with every fiber in my being, I hope that becomes law, because we as a country need to be at a much different place than we are at the moment in terms of national policy. Of course, California is a leader on climate policy, and that's fortunate for all of us. San Mateo County also has passed the Clean Power Plan several years ago. That's been a wonderful policy addition. Deborah and I were talking just before the meeting here about Half Moon Bay passing a a rule that new construction has to be all electric, and electrifying everything is the thing that needs to happen so that we can get off of our fossil fuel addiction, both cars and industry and housing and other forms of transportation. Plastics are made of fossil fuels, of course. So every piece of policy and awareness and legislation is making a difference. It's just not happening fast enough for what is needed for a stable and healthy future.
The issue that comes up for folks when you talk about going electric is often, gee, I can't afford it. It's too expensive. I'm going to wait until technology gets better or rebates come in from the federal government or the national government or the state government, excuse me. What do you say to that? It seems to me that we have to stop being selfish and think in terms of, how can we help our planet, not just how can we survive economically?
Right. Well, there's some interesting research that shows that every dollar that's spent now saves $6 of disaster management later. So, I mean, it's smart money to spend now versus later. I know that individual family budgets, vary, and not everybody has the same means. And so it is important for government to step in and provide support to encourage these new adoption of the new technologies. And also, it's not about, the future is a very abstract idea, but a lot of us have children and grandchildren. And it is literally true now that we are at such a moment of such a pivot point with the climate crisis that every single thing we do now saves really a magnitude of an exponential amount of difficulty and cost and suffering later for others. Now it's, we have to extend ourselves empathetically to others, but it's the others that might be in our own families, right? So we can, I feel like we can take it personally with good reason, and that if we each spend a little bit more of our energy and our attention, as well as our money, on safeguarding the future for our kids. That's why I researched and wrote the book, of course, was for my kids.
Yeah, I know there are things that we can do locally and personally. One of the things that comes to mind is we have PC&E, which is a PCA, a private, forget what the acronym stands for, but it is, it uses renewable energy to provide our electricity. And I know we work with PG&E, so the PG&E will send us our electric bill every month. But PC&E, if you opt into that program, you can end up getting some percentage, either 0, either 20, I think it starts at 20, it goes up to 100% of your energy to be renewable energy. Can you speak to that? And also the other thing that comes to mind is the use of single-use plastic.
Right. Well, yes. So the choices we can make individually. I mean, we invested in solar about 7 years ago. There was an upfront cost, but it is now paid for itself, and we have free power. We got a couple of secondhand electric cars. We never go to the gas station. We don't pay these gas prices. So there are ways that you can actually, engage with this sort of the new economy personally, and then there is, as you're saying, this level at which you can opt into government programs that can provide cleaner energy to all of us. I feel it's really important to learn about these options and avail ourselves of them. The plastic bag ban, I think, was a really good example of something that really, only what I was thrilled that it was passed, because it showed that people will make a choice for the greater good, and we'll tax ourselves, a few pennies to do the right thing. And it was really an overnight switch, right? Everybody learned that you can take your own bags and you can get rid of a lot of the single-use plastic. And the first story in the book is about single-use plastic, well, the plastic garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean, and how detrimental it is to sea life, and how massive it is. And we've all heard about this. I tell the story in this chapter in terms of a sea turtle, and the sea turtle who's really a grandmother, 52-year-old turtle who's going about her business in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, on a coral atoll, and it happens to eat a piece of an old t-shirt, an old synthetic, one of these athleisure wear t-shirts that happen to get into the waste stream, and chokes and dies. These things are happening far out of our visual range, and that's part of why I wanted to write a book about the ocean, because some of these things are affecting us on our coasts and in our cities, and there's sea level rise, of course, and coastal pollution, et cetera. But a lot of these impacts are happening far, far away, but impacting oceans and ecosystems and other living beings besides ourselves. And that's what I wanted to really understand and write about.
Thank you. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit now about, and maybe we could show some slides of the beautiful artwork, about how you go about making this art, what your process is?
Yeah, sure. So I make the maps in the book. I made them using dried seaweed, and I collect the seaweed here in Half Moon Bay Harbor. The reason it's so abundant in Half Moon Bay Harbor is actually because of excessive fertilizer use by local farmers. That's what causes these algae to grow so abundantly. So I found this one piece of algae, this sort of sea lettuce, which is what you're seeing here. A map that was a map of Antarctica. And maybe you can go back. I can talk about that for a moment. Yes. So the sea lettuce starts out as this giant green slimy sheet, and I stretch it and dry it in my studio, and it bleaches over time into this parchment color. This image is Antarctica, the ice river speed. So the glaciers, they call them ice rivers, which is kind of beautiful name, and they are moving 10 times faster than they used to move, than they would move in a climate stable environment. And again, this is a far away, but this is one of the most dangerous and catastrophic developments of recent decades. As these giant ice cliffs fail and fall into the ocean, they are raising sea levels. And so this is something we need to be aware of. And I love this map. It reminds me of like a Grateful Dead t-shirt or something, but in the scariest possible way. So you could go to the next map. This is actually, let's see, that one, yes. This is actually a map of the entire global ocean. We rarely see the ocean depicted. There's only one map projection that shows the ocean as a whole body of water. And if you sort of turn your head to one side, you can see Africa. Antarctica is at the very center. California is off on the kind of right lower edge. So, to me, it was important to understand the ocean as an entire system. We don't think of it often this way, but of course it is one body of water, all connected. And I feel like part of what we need to do is change our orientation toward nature, toward the ocean, and see these things as systems rather than as resources to be used and used up and abused. So I wanted to include this map in the book to show the integrity and the wholeness of the ocean. And again, this is all from this one piece of sea lettuce that it probably weighed 40 pounds and it was probably 200 square feet. It was absolutely massive. And I cut it into many, many pieces and made all of the art in the book from this one piece of algae. So the next map, I believe, is San Francisco Bay. I wanted to include this map because I made sure to get Half Moon Bay in my book, down there in the lower left. But this map is showing pollution, water pollution, and shoreline pollution. And the blue is indicating where sea level will be in, if it's 50 years or 100 years, it hardly matters. Sea levels will rise this much, and that is the same amount of land that was filled in over the past 100 years to create everything from Cargill salt marshes to Foster City to Oakland Airport SFOs there and below the waterline as well. So we have a lot of very, very vulnerable land in the Bay Area, and we have to think very seriously about, do we just want to live behind walls? Because or do we want to invest in the idea of moving back and giving the former marshlands back to the natural environment, which will help buffer future storms, and do a smart job of renaturalizing some of the environment that we have destroyed. And the various colored dots on this map show different kinds of poison, Superfund sites, fire retardants, chrome plating facilities, all landfills, all things that we've put right on the edge of the bay that as the water rises, these are going to be leaching ever more toxins into our bay. And, so San Mateo County has more bayshore, like billions and billions of dollars of bayshore property at risk. And instead of building more, we need to be thoughtfully retreating from the edge of the bay, protecting what's only absolutely necessary, and having better planning laws. That's a really important priority for the next 30 or so years, even though it doesn't seem like we need it today. Buildings, once they're built, they last a long time, and we need to be thinking smart about the future.
Yeah.
And then the last map. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Well, since this is a map of the Bay Area, maybe you had something to say about the Bay, or?
Well, what I was going to remark on was the fact that it's not simply sea level rise.
Right.
Our climate, atmospheric climate is changing in a way so that we are getting superstorms. And superstorms, what do they call, the Pineapple Express that we suffered from last winter, that amount of water running down our lands from our hills and into the ocean is eroding land. It's also causing the destruction of wildlife, of trees and vegetable growth, so that we're denuding the land. And then we have the subsequent mudslides. So my sense is that whatever we talk about, when we talk about attacking the problem, we've got to be talking about it from many different angles.
Right, which is what I was saying in terms of systems, because, and then you put fire in that mix too here in California, right? So we've got a whole system that is, going off the rails a little bit. And the only way to address climate change, sea level rise, and everything you just mentioned is to drive carbon emissions levels back down to their pre-industrial levels. Carbon emissions are still rising globally, Some countries are sort of leveling off in some of the Western countries, but this is a global problem, for one. And two, what needs to happen, instead of net zero, which is this kind of talking point that politicians often use, that's just talking about leveling. What that means is that we will only emit as much carbon as we can also then take out of the atmosphere. And there's two problems. One is that technology for taking the carbon out of the atmosphere does not exist. It's all premised on imaginative technology that doesn't exist yet at scale. And also that just zeroes us out at kind of our current state. And our current state is significantly over. Of course, I mean, the numbers are that we're at 425 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, and we need to be at 300, which is where things were before fossil fuel burning started a couple hundred years ago. That's where the stable, safe zone for the planet is when we take that carbon level and we drop it down. And until we do that, and until we get really serious about that, seas are, fires are going to continue, sea level rise, storms are going to strengthen, the waters in the ocean are going to warm, and the ice is going to melt. And this is really the cold, hard truth of the matter, that we need to, be really honest with ourselves about, because we can only start to do something about it once we are honest with ourselves. And so the last map, this to drive the point home, this is ocean warming over comparing the years 1950 to 2000 with 2050 to 2100. So comparing century on century, roughly. And the entire ocean's going to warm. The yellow areas are warming maybe 1 to 2 degrees, and the dark red areas are warming as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And that for an ocean systems exist in this very fine chemical balance. So between ocean acidification and ocean warming, so many of the creatures who live in and depend on the water, who are mostly water as they live in it, will become extinct. Ecosystems are turning on their heads even now, before we've gotten to this point. And this point is, maybe 50, 70 years away. So some of this warming trend, we can't stop. Like we have already put a lot of this is baked in at this point, but we can affect how quickly it happens and how much worse it gets than what is already slated to take place. And so it's a lot to take in. It's frightening, but that's why we need to be frank and honest and serious in our conversations with each other about this issue at this point. So maybe we can go back to seeing each other on the screen now. There, hello.
Hello again.
Yeah, so those are the maps. I mean, it's layered seaweed on top of digital maps, and for many cities around the world, from Shanghai to New York to London, Hamburg, and then also open ocean zones like the Arabian Sea and the South Pacific, and many other locations, 20 in total, as you said.
One of the things that so impressed me with your book, besides the beautiful seaweed illustrations, was the format, the fact that you do it through storytelling. I think what could be considered very dry material and very complicated and very difficult for some of us who aren't scientists to understand, you make understandable by telling a story. and you chose such interesting places to do that. Could you talk about one or two of those?
Yeah, I'll share a couple of my favorites. One of them is I tell the story in London of a little boy, and this is actually true. I read about him in a local newspaper there, who was so concerned about the climate emergency that he went to his local county council meeting, and he was 6 years old, and with his mother, who had become very concerned when she attended an Extinction Rebellion event in London, and she hadn't realized how bad things were. And then she went and she talked to some scientists, and she got scared and she got busy. And her astute little boy went to the city council and argued for youth representation on the council, because only the, he's like, basically only the kids get it, right? We're going to live with this. And so I started with him, but then the story of what's happening in the whole Thames estuary and all of the politics and all of the complicated decisions that need to be made in the coming decades. And then every chapter also has a story looking back from the year 2050. So it's a speculative fiction piece in each story to sort of propose what could happen, what should happen, what shouldn't happen. And in this this particular story, I propose that this little boy become prime minister, because he's a great little kid and he really understands. And I think youth activism is such an important piece of what's happening right now. The current generation really has a much greater incentive, but also a greater understanding at a felt bone deep level of what's going on. And so that was a story I really enjoyed writing. And another one included another activist. You can see where my sympathies lie. And this was a woman who in the Cook Islands of the South Pacific, it's a tiny island nation. The whole nation has 15,000 people in it. And they are torn right now in this battle between environmentalists and people who value their cultural identity in the Polynesian identity of, really valuing the ocean and living on the sea and living from the sea and being fishermen. And then there's this new pressure of international conglomerates coming and saying, well, sell us the rights to scrape the minerals off your seabed floor of your economic exclusion area, and you'll become billionaires, and wouldn't that be great? But of course, that pollutes the entire environment. It's an unproven technology. It's the Wild West of mining right now, is scraping the bottom of the seafloor for minerals like manganese and others. And it's an unproven technology. It's incredibly risky, and it just goes into this story of we have to, sort of continue to rape and pillage the earth in order to feed our appetites for more gadgets. And so anyway, that is a story that I really enjoyed researching. The sad truth is that the government went ahead and permitted deep sea mining, exploratory excavations. And so that is, an area that I hope that more activism will happen, because we need to protect, the United Nations goal is to protect 30% of the planet by 2030. Like, we need to protect large swaths of ocean environments from resource extraction, because we need a planet that still has, functioning whole ecosystems.
Yeah. Christina, can you tell us what else you're working on right now?
Yes. Well, I finished writing the book about a year ago at this point, and I've in the process of researching it, I became so interested in how deeply connected all of these issues are. I started really thinking about, the ocean and the climate crisis. But when you do that, you start to see that, it's related, that biodiversity loss is related to the climate crisis. And even, political upheaval is related to the climate crisis. One of the chapters is about climate refugees in Myanmar, because the Rohingya refugee crisis a few years back wasn't only, I mean, it was mostly this awful ethnic cleansing that happened because of the generals in the junta there, but also the storms, as you mentioned, the increasing storms and salt intrusion into the farmlands where all of these poor coastal farmers live together. The two ethnic groups in that region were both suffering and struggling tremendously. And so it really only took one match to light the fire that sent 1 million people on the road to refugee camps in Bangladesh. So we're going to have these tremendous tides of people, tides of water. These are challenges we're going to be facing in the coming decades, and it really will serve us well to start thinking and talking about them now, and that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, I think in here on the coast in Half Moon Bay, a lot of these issues come home. We see on the coast, we've got regenerative farming starting, and that's a very exciting idea. I'd like to see us do more with our fishing industry than we are currently doing, although there are organizations that work on putting trout back in our freshwater streams. I think our ocean fishing industry needs some help. And I think that, I'd like to see us investigate ways to work with our fishermen and our farmers to make it profitable for them, or at least let them make a decent wage and survive using newer techniques.
Yeah, so there are wonderful things happening. And that was the other thing about writing the book, is that I learned so many amazing things that are happening around the world that are moving us forward, that don't get the same airplay as the bad news. So there are scientists who are figuring out how to grow kelp on massive forest level scales in the ocean to sequester carbon. And there are, there's all these regenerative farm practices happening now that are, dramatically cutting back on any fertilizer pollution that goes into the ocean, which solves many, many problems, and is healthier for all of the people, right, who have to work the land. So, and there's another movement that really excited me, which is the rights of nature movement. And this is a legal movement to really actually enshrine rights in natural environments, in the same way that a corporation can have rights, an ecosystem can have rights. And this is happening in places around the world in ways that are really powerful. So one of the early places this happened was in New Zealand, where the Maori people enshrined the rights of a particular river that's very important to them, and so that there's a person who represents the rights of that river in any negotiations that have to do with that river. There are other movements that include the near coastal zone in planning decisions, so that you don't imagine that you can just flush away your waste and not take into account the blue ecosystem just adjacent to you, whether it's the bay or the coast. These are all things that's called blue urbanism. So there's all these really interesting movements happening that make me incredibly hopeful. And I think one thing I would say to people is that, it's really about us each looking at our sphere of influence and finding out, what are we good at, and what is our sphere, and taking some action there. And whether that's going to city council meetings and being vocal, or being in your workplace, being the person who brings green issues to the fore. I think we all can do a lot to be more aware and more vocal about these things in our daily lives and communities.
Yeah, I hear so much about, well, gee, I can't afford it. I'd love to get an electric car or a hybrid car, but I can't afford it. I would love to have solar panels on my roof, but I can't afford it. And I think that there are things that we can afford. We do not have to buy single-use plastic bottles filled with water. We can get a glass bottle or an aluminum bottle and refill it. And those little things add up in more ways than just economically or helping with carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. They help to influence your neighbors. They help to influence the community that you live in.
So we bought 2 secondhand electric cars, quite inexpensive. We plug them in and never pay these gas prices these days. It feels great to drive on by the gas station. These don't have to be expensive options. So there are certain solar companies who will lease your roof space. They will put the solar panels up there. There are things we need to investigate, and there are creative ways people are coming together also as communities to, like farmers markets are a fantastic way to support local agriculture, support the jobs that creates, get healthier food with less pollution, better nutrients. That's a win-win-win. I'm a big fan of local food production because, anything you buy in a clamshell from Chile has a huge carbon footprint. And so it really does pay to think about every single little purchase that you make, to be thoughtful in your consumption. And where are the clothes you're buying from? I'm mostly shopping now at secondhand stores because there's great stuff there, and I don't need the newest, coolest thing. So I think it's about being more thoughtful about our consumption, because consuming all these resources is really one of the critical problems that's created all of this, the resource extraction, the fossil fuel consumption, the carbon emissions, the heating of the planet. Like it's all a system, right? So when we play a piece of that individually, and then we can also come together with our communities, whether it's your town or your church or some other community of people to become part of a movement to bring about bigger level change.
Okay, well, we have 2 questions, it looks like, in the Q&A. The first one is from Ron. He says, electrification of new homes seems to be the latest mantra. When I replaced years ago the all-electric service with natural gas in my newly purchased home, the previous owner worked for PG&E and had a deep discount, it was very much less expensive. So having spent so much converting my appliances, why would I convert back to electric? The economics, not to mention several cooking aesthetics, don't work under present policies.
Right. So I think there was a period between, like after the Second World War, like the second half of the 20th century, where we all got fairly bamboozled by the fossil fuel industry to think that natural gas was somehow not a fossil fuel, that it was natural, we were at one point we were going to run out of gas, and then there was plenty more, and so we didn't need to conserve as much, and we raised our speed limits again, and things like that. So I feel like a lot of my adult life has been we've been falling asleep, and it's really time that we need to wake up. And I guess the answer to the specific question is that because of the nature of the climate crisis, electrification is the policy, is the answer that does need to happen. The sun and the wind provide all the energy we need, and we will, develop systems to harness it. And for example, I just bought in terms of appliances, bought an electric induction oven. It was more expensive, but we had to replace our oven anyway. And we invested in an electric induction oven, which is works just like gas, but it's all electric. It's as fast as gas. It's fantastic. I love it. So, the technologies exist. They will be a little more expensive in the short term. There will be, some subsidies and some help. It's again, as we were saying earlier, it's about making choices for the longer term, as well as, out of conscience, I suppose.
Okay, the second question is from an anonymous attendee. I live in a townhouse. How can we switch to solar?
Well, if you have I don't know the specifics, a homeowners association. I have not worked with them specifically, but I believe that there could be a process of coming together as a community and deciding to invest in solar. So these are kind of new times and new models that we're creating as we go. We all developed, we all grew up in systems of, I've got my house and I've got my car, and I'm, this is how that system operates. But as we come together more as communities around these ideas of regenerative culture and sustainability, I think we're going to have to create some interesting new ways of trying these things out. Maybe it hasn't done before, but maybe your condo complex could be the first.
There are no more questions, but there are some comments in the chat, and maybe I'll just read one of them. Mark Nicely says, electric cars are powered by fossil fuels. It is better to consider hydrogen-powered cars that produce only water. Don't rely on fossil fuels at all. How would you respond to that?
I would say that there are, a couple of hydrogen fuel cell cars on the market now. There will be more. I think it's all to the good. For me, the main challenge with electric vehicles is, it takes tremendous amounts of rare earth minerals to build the batteries that go into these vehicles. They are not a trouble-free object. I know this. So I'm very aware of the challenges of really all of industrial society right now is all premised on these extractive practices that really do harm the earth, and open pit mines, and it goes on and on. There's a really wonderful art project, if anybody wants to look it up, called extractionart.org, and this has been a 1.5 year long project with people contributing artworks that look at these extractive practices. So I fully agree that we need to be, very, very mindful of the things we do consume, and consume less.
All right. Mark also says, I have very inexpensive solar power. I lease it, paying just $65 per month for power. It cost around $2,000 to have the panels fitted, and it has saved us a lot of money. So that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, Bob and Christine Bowles say, it's nonsense to say that electric cars run on fossil fuels. Everything will run in part on fossil fuels, including hydrogen cars, until we fully transition to sustainable green power sources.
Yeah, so it is, to me, this all ties together with this broader story of production and consumption, right? So it takes fossil fuels to move a car from the Tesla plant in China to the sales lot in Daly City. So right, we have very few clean and pure options right now. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are working very hard in this field of regenerative agriculture, energy culture. There's a lot going on, but we are in this very uncomfortable middle right now. We are in a transitional period where we know it needs to change. We know we need to change. Not everything is available yet. Not everything has been developed yet. It's hard to see the way forward. It's hard to keep hope. And hope, by hope, I mean like a very active, like engaged kind of practice in our own lives, and to not just feel overwhelmed by it all. And that's where I feel like coming together with others in communities, as I said, whether it's a friend group, a book club, a church, like whatever your community is, find some people who also take this seriously. And like there's a great group over on the other side of the hill called thisiswhatwedid.org. And it's like 100 people who've come together, and they wanted to be able to say to their grandchildren, this is what we did. And so they've changed their banking practices, and they're taking out ads in newspapers to educate the public about climate change and all of the ways that we can make a difference. And so it's about finding your people and taking some steps forward in solidarity and with maintaining the best attitudes we can.
Mark nicely also wrote that, and he's reading your book, which is wonderful. On page 11, the top 10 debris items that are plastic should be 8, not 7. Would you agree? I think that cigarettes should be considered plastic. We have a picnic table made from cigarette butt plastics at Muscle Rock in Daly City.
Excellent. Right. Those horrible cigarette filters that are, luckily fewer people are smoking now. Yeah, they're plastic as well. They're terrible. I took that graphic from, oh gosh, some EPA source, I believe it was. So that wasn't my original data, but yeah, all plastics come from fossil fuels. This was my point in writing that story, is that plastic starts at the drill head. It's pumped out of the ground, and then there's this really complex, disgusting process it's basically a byproduct of creating diesel and airplane fuel and all the different fuels. And what comes off the top of that whole refinement process is ethylene, which is the building block of plastic. And so the fossil fuel industry fully intends, their projections and their goal is to replace all of the energy consumption that is saved by us driving electric cars over the next few decades, to replace it with increased plastic consumption. So to me, that's something that if we know it, we can be aware and we can make different choices, right? That we don't have to be just sort of hapless victims in this scheme to make us all use even more plastic than we already do. I mean, it does feel like a total tidal wave a lot of the time, and it's almost impossible to go to the grocery store without, you know, buying a ton of plastic. It's very depressing. But, you know, again, people are going to farmers markets and buying locally sourced things. I've got a great CSA that delivers to my house. So we just have to do the best we can in this transitional time, putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. We have one more question. Someone, Deborah Lapalm, asked the question, how effective projects like the Foster City Levy are?
Well, that's a tricky one. I would say in the short term, a little bit effective. In the long term, not at all effective. You know, so Foster City is already behind a levy. They're going to make it taller to try to keep the flood insurance rates down. There's this whole negotiation with FEMA always about flood insurance for lands that really should be uninsurable because they are in such high risk locations. So I wouldn't live there. I mean, personally, and it's you know, a lot of some land is on borrowed time, and so we can either be thinking about how we, you know, invest for we can either invest in long-term solutions, or we can continue to put a lot of money into these short-term sort of band-aid solutions that I really, you know, fear that money will be throwing good money after bad at a certain point. And you know, the wiser investment would be to look at different locations for our communities. For some of them, you know, maybe not all of them. That's a very hard sell, of course, to people who are living in these environments. But we've got 30 years before sea levels rise 1 foot, according to NOAA. And of course, 1 foot is a tremendous amount of water. It's an inconceivable amount of water. And so, you know, this is just the physics of it. And we need to have better planning and public policy to account for it.
Great, thank you for that. We have 3 more questions in the Q&A. The first is, do you have any current exhibits of your artwork?
Oh, thanks for asking. I just had 2 up in Oakland until very recently. Some of my newer work is using algae to make prints on sort of abstract maps, really, using inks, and they're pretty interesting. Actually, you can see one right there. And I guess I've got some on my website. I don't know if I have any shows immediately forthcoming. I'm speaking at the Bay Area Book Festival in a couple of weeks. And I'm involved in a network where if anybody's interested, it's called the Deep Transformation Network. The website is deeptransformation.network. And that is a place where a lot of people who are interested in these ideas are gathering. I run a bi-weekly arts and culture conversation there on Tuesdays. But also people are talking about, you know, indigenous wisdom and different aspects of economics and culture and education, and how are we going to write these new stories that we need to live our way into. Right now, like I said, in a pretty uncomfortable spot, but there are people who are thinking and writing and working really hard to find the new story.
What do you say to people who feel overwhelmed by climate change when you talk about your work?
Yeah, that's everybody. this is not easy for anyone, including me. It was very difficult to read all the research and try to find the stories that would touch people. Yeah, it can be overwhelming, and I think the thing is, our culture, we tend to avoid sadness and grief, but there's a huge industry now of therapists and coaches who are really only helping people with climate grief. I mean, this is a real thing, and it is overwhelming and frightening. And so I would say, seek companionship, right? This is where we have to come together as communities and neighborhoods and families. And if you don't have your circle of people yet, try to build one, join 350.org, join, the group I was mentioning earlier, This Is What We Did, because I think it really helps. It really helps to have compatriots and friends to talk to and to lean on when it does feel hard. And it also then gives you people who you can take some action with, and that also feels really good. So I would say those two things together are the magic sauce for dealing with the very real overwhelm and fear that can come with these times.
Yeah, and I think also just doing the little few things that you can locally, attending your city council meetings, signing petitions, not using single-use plastic, those sorts of things can give you a sense that you're doing something. Even though it's a drop in the bucket, it's still a drop in the bucket.
And everybody's drops add up to an ocean. I mean, literally. Yep.
We also have a comment. Use the term thoughtful retreat rather than the contentious managed retreat. That worthwhile initiative in Pacifica was defeated some years ago. An example of individual property owner winning out over the community. Thoughts about how to promote more community-minded thinking.
Right. I mean, this is the challenge of our time, because we are used to thinking as individuals and as about our property lines and our rights and our but less so about the common good, the commons, the community, and our responsibilities, right? So I feel like this is a shift that will happen slowly and in some places painfully. It's about neighbors talking to neighbors and having difficult conversations, hopefully with, as empathy and compassion. Everybody's feeling a lot of anxiety. What's going to happen next is a real issue. So there aren't, easy answers, but I think as Deborah was saying before the meeting here, Half Moon Bay passed a rule that new construction has to be all electric, but not home additions. And she had been pushing that all new like home renovations also be electric. That some felt, perhaps the contractors and certain louder voices felt like it was a step too far. Except that my hope for that is that that this was an education process, right? It's a step. Everybody, the measure in Pacifica was a step. It wasn't. It didn't pass the first time. The Build Back Better legislation is stalled, but we have to keep working and we have to keep moving forward. And sooner is better. Sooner is always better. But we just keep moving forward. This idea that the world ends in 2030, we fall off a cliff if we don't meet some goals in that time frame. I think that's it's impossible, it's fear-mongering, it's not useful, it's not helpful. We just have to keep going.
Well, Christina, this has been just an amazing hour and a half. I can't believe it's over already, but it has been so enlightening. I want to hold up your book because if people see it, then they'll recognize it when they go to the library, they go to bookstores. And can you all see this?
Yes.
When I look at it, it's written backwards, but that's, I guess, the way it has to be. But
We
it
see
says
it.
The Atlas of Disappearing Places. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful
Here's-
book. I enjoyed
Here's a
it
little
so
picture
much.
of some little microorganisms from the ocean. That was one of my
Yes.
favorite chapters. Anyway,
Lovely.
there's lots of art all throughout it, and it's all told in stories, as Deborah said. So hopefully very approachable. We've gotten some good feedback on it, so I hope people enjoy it. I guess it's available. It'll be in the libraries very soon, and it's available at any bookstore, online or in person.
Does Inkspill have it currently? Do you know?
I know they've been special ordering it for people. I don't know if they have it on the shelves. I know Coastside Books does, but that's
good.
just on our side. That's our side of the hill. I don't know about the other side of the hill.
Right. Okay. Well, thank
Well,
you again. This has been delightful, and I can't tell you what a pleasure it has been for me personally to meet you. I so thoroughly enjoyed the book, and I'm still enjoying the book. It's not one that I will be putting down and shelving.
oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure meeting and talking to you as well, and connecting with my fellow San Mateo County people.